Welcome back. I'm here with economist Karen DeCoster. Karen, before the break, I wanted to ask you about China buying up large sections of Detroit. What is the truth behind that?
There's not a lot of truth behind it. It's quite sensationalized, and I'll tell you what disturbs me is I saw one story that came out, and I don't know if it originated in the Atlantic, but all the multiple media outlets, they tend to pick up other outlet stories, and you can't really tell if it's their own original story or if it's just basically a rehash. And I looked at about 10 different media stories. They all seem to present pretty much, if not word for word, the same stuff in a reprint. They were also presenting the same types of sources. One of those sources was real estate agents in Detroit are saying, the real estate agents were never named. I could never find any sources other than one individual in Troy, Michigan, which is a suburb. Her name is Caroline Chen, and these stories keep using the same source. So I think, you look at China. Obviously, it's one of the most expensive places in the world in which to invest in real estate. And so the Chinese, of course, are always looking overseas for bargains, whether it's our treasuries or bonds or whether it's real estate. So I don't doubt that there is some rumblings there with the Chinese trying to buy up properties. But the other thing the story talks about is the fact that the Chinese are told that they can buy 2 houses in Detroit for the price of 2 pair of shoes. I've seen this story 10 different times. So I'm not seeing any facts. I'm not seeing any new information. I don't know the volume of this buying that's supposedly occurring. Nobody else I've talked to here knows anything either. So I think it's just a case of, China's always looking overseas. They're looking at a lot of broken municipalities. They're looking at a rotten economy. They're looking for bargains. But I can tell you honestly, I don't see any truth that there is a lot of Chinese buying going on here.
Now, Karen, what can be done to return Detroit to financial stability?
Well, some of it's already happening. We have a very anarchistic environment going on here. It's a groundswell from, grassroots, from the ground up, very voluntarist, what I call stuff happening in spite of the government. Rather than being created by government. None of this good stuff is being created by government. It's happening because the government has been so inept for so long, and people are just finally doing an end around government and basically creating their own economy. Some are underground, some are very above ground. But one thing you see going on right now in the city of Detroit is a reverse white flight. There's been, over the last 4 or 5 years, there's just been a whole lot of people moving back into the city, a lot of empty nesters, young people moving from the suburbs. There's also an influx of a lot of different minorities and ethnic people. So we have a really cool eclectic melting pot going on down there. A lot of highly paid professionals going back to the downtown dense areas. Also, the outlook here to me is finally we're attracting human capital. For decades, really, young people got their degrees here, and they had no reason to stay in the city of Detroit. There was nothing to stay here for. So our young people, our great human capital, they left. So now this generation of young people, some people refer to them as hipsters in the media, but the young people are starting to like Detroit, and they're starting to come back to Detroit. They're flocking to Detroit properties, rental and buying.
Well, let me ask you about the abandoned properties. As I reported in the beginning of the interview, 78,000 abandoned properties. What does it take for an individual to go in and purchase properties, these abandoned properties, raise them, and then build up something new?
Well, you're seeing a lot of stories about the $100 and the $1 house in the city of Detroit. Again, very over-exaggerated. There's auctions that go on here where you can freely purchase properties. And if you invest a lot of time in understanding how to do that, you can find properties that are maybe good for later investment, but you're not getting $100 or $1,000 houses that are good enough to live in without putting a fortune into them. They've all been stripped. And all these houses, remember, are not in the more dense areas of the city where the resurgence is happening. These homes are in the outlying areas. If you look at the Google Maps shot of Detroit and its outlying areas, you get to see exactly how vacant this city is in the outskirts of the city. That part is very true. These properties may be good for investment. I think in a lot of ways they are. We've had John Hans. He is an investor here who has bought several hundred acres, and he's trying to buy several hundred more to develop a private tree farm. So that's the sort of thing that people are looking at these properties for. In order for the resurgence and the renaissance that's happening right now downtown to get out to those areas, it will take many, many years. The city's been too large, too many people at its top population of about 1.8 million, and downsizing, and this is not what you'll hear from the media, but downsizing is really good for this city.
Now, Karen, what do you think is going to be the effects of all these property purchases on the city, the new property purchases?
Well, what you're seeing over the last 3 years, I was looking at purchasing something downtown about 3 years ago. I started looking at lofts, and because I work down there and I'm down there 7 days a week, it was very affordable back then. But we've had two private initiatives that have gone on in the city where employers, including mine, have incentivized their employees to live in the city, whether it's renting or a restoration or buying in the city. And that, along with the new popularity of Detroit and the hipsters and the young people, the Midtown area and Brush Park and Woodbridge and Lafayette Park, all these areas are at just about zero vacancy. Prices have gone way up since then, although by looking in comparison with other cities, there's still a very, very good standard of living here. You can have a lot of home space for very little cost in Detroit.
But Karen, last question. What is the outlook over the next 10 years for the Motor City?
Well, I think the outlook is density, establishing density. And you look at the outskirts of the city where all those vacant areas are, doing something with those, because I don't think we can ever reestablish the neighborhoods here. There's been a lot of talk about that. Really, the word downsizing has been used, and that's taking all the resources Detroit can offer to residents and pulling it into a much smaller area, because there just can't be resources extended to these neighborhoods multiple miles out where there's very few people living, where they really have no street lights. Oftentimes they don't have, obviously, 9/11 service. The cops take forever to come. So I think it's pulling those areas in, creating a core density in the core urban area, and allowing those outskirts to be bought up by private investors for urban agriculture, tree farming, and other similar private endeavors.
Karen, thanks for joining us again on the program.
You're welcome.
All right, that was Karen DeCoster. You can read her reports at LouRockwell.com. Stay tuned because we still have more headlines ahead. We've also got a full report on the weather and your Hollywood report. We'll be right back.